Okay, this is the grouping method. This is the one that makes the most sense to me. However, it does have some extra steps that some people don't like. So it's very linear, it's not very visual, and so some people really don't like it, so you might want to look at the box method. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to do a couple problems, and I'm going to explain it to you as well as I can. We're going to start with number 8 from the notes, 5a.4 notes. 12x squared minus 15x minus 27. I'm going to look for my GCF to begin with to make sure. It's going to make my magic x easier, so I'm going to do that. So what goes into 12x, 15x, and 27? In this case, we can take out a 3. So I'm going to make a new trinomial of 4x squared minus 5x minus 9. I divided everything by 3. Okay, we don't need to worry about that anymore. We're going to do our magic x over here. I did a whole video on magic x, so if you need to go back and review that, that's a times c and b down here. And again, we're doing the a times c from the new trinomial to make it easier on us. So it's going to be negative 36 at the top, and b is going to be negative 5. Now I went and I looked this, I did this prior to this, so I know it's going to be negative 9 and 4. And I always do a quick check. Does negative 9 times positive 4 equal negative 36? Yes. And does negative 9 plus 4 equal negative 5? Yes. Okay. Now here's where it's very linear. What I do is I take my 3 and I just write that down. And in my parentheses, I have a 4x squared as my last term, and a negative, or my first term, and a negative 9 is my last term. I don't know why it just made that look like that, but let's fix it. Okay? Now what I want, and what the magic x does for me, it splits that middle term up into two terms that work for me here. Okay? And that's why we did the magic x. Now this is what you have to remember. If you're using the magic x and you're using grouping, what comes out of the magic x always has a variable on it, okay? Because we're splitting that middle term which has a variable on it. So that, and it doesn't matter which one comes first or second. So that negative 5 I'm going to rewrite as negative 9x plus 4x. And you can see this makes the most sense to me because what I did was I took negative 5x and I split it up into 2, and we had to use the magic x to make sure it works for the whole thing, okay? All right, so now we have that split, and we're going to do a grouping. Here's how we do the grouping. We look at our first group, and then we look at our second group as the second group, okay? In our first group, what's the greatest common factor in our first group? In our first group, the greatest common factor is x. So we're going to factor out an x, which leaves behind a 4x minus 9. Okay? In our next group, what is the greatest common factor of 4x and negative 9? It's just a 1. So we factor out a 1. Here's one of the reasons I really like grouping method. It has an internal check. If you did it correctly, your two groups, when you factor out the greatest common factor, should match. If they match, you did it correctly. So 4x minus 9 and 4x minus 9 match. And so we're going to write that down, 4x minus 9. That's our group. That's our chunks that match. I always call them the chunks. And then in my other parentheses, I write down what's on the outside of those two chunks. What's on the outside of those two chunks is x and a plus 1. Those are our two factors. Now some of you are like, whoa, where'd that 3 go? Well, the whole time the 3's kind of just waiting outside here for you to do your math inside. And so then you write your 3 on the outside. And these are our factors. Okay? Now again, some of you are like, oh my gosh, that's a whole lot of work. I like the box method better. That's why I'm showing you all 3. There's different, it just depends on the way your brain works. I like this method. It's very linear, it's very logical, it follows my green thinking very easily. But if you are more of a yellow thinker, this might confuse you. You may want to go back and look at the box method, okay? So that's number 8. But those of you who are sticking with the grouping method with me, let's do another one. Number 9, from the same notes, okay? Number 9 is 9y squared plus 30y plus 25. Now, if you're like me, I'm already looking for a GCF, okay? Because I'm trying to make that a pattern that I always do. And right away, I'm thinking 3, because I have a 9 and a 30. Oh, it must be 3. But then I come by and I see a 25. Well, 25 isn't divisible by 3. Well, 30 is divisible by 5, but 9 isn't. So my GCF here is 1. Okay. Now, you can do grouping in a couple different ways, orders. So the first thing you might want to do is write down your 9y squared and your 25. And then you know you're going to split that middle term, so I'm going to do a little split here. But I don't know what I'm going to split it to. I do know they both have to have y's on them. Okay, so 25 is a plus. And so I do know they both have to have y's. I just don't know what numbers need to go on those y's. So I'm going to put some y's here and see what I need. Okay? But then I'm going to come over and do my magic x and figure out the numbers that go on those y's. So again, top of the magic x is a times c. So in this case, it's 225, big number. And b goes down here, which is 30. Now I have to admit, I hate to admit this, I did use my graphing calculator for this. And then when I saw the answer, I was like, oh, duh. And that happens sometimes. I mean, what are you going to do? Sometimes your brain just doesn't get the answer right away. So I went to my graphing calculator, went to y equals 225 divided by x. Then I went to second graph and I looked at my table of values. As soon as I came across 15 and 15, I was like, duh. Because 15 times 15 is 225 and 15 plus 15 is 30. It doesn't always pop into your brain that quickly. So now I know what goes in front of my y's, positive 15s. Okay? Now I'm going to look at my two separate groups and I'm going to take out my GCF. Okay? In my first group, what goes into 9 and 15? Well, 3 does. There's also a y in both of those, so I'm going to take out a y. What's left behind from that group when I take out a 3y is 3y plus 5. Now again, if I do this correctly, what I have in my other group should be 3y plus 5. So 5 goes into 15 and 25, so that's my greatest common factor. And I'm crossing my fingers, hoping it matches. Well, 15 divided by 5, not really crossing my fingers, is 3y, because I know I did it right. And 25 divided by 5 is 5. Okay, do our two chunks match? And I say chunks on purpose because I know it grosses people out. 3y plus 5 and 3y plus 5. Yahoo, they match. I must have done this right. The chances of me not doing it right are pretty slim if they match. So I'm going to write that down once because I'm going to take a 3y plus 5 off of both groups. And then what's left on the outside of those happens to be 3y plus 5. Those are my outside numbers. Okay, so I call the first the chunk and then my leftovers. You could write it like this, or you could write 3y plus 5 squared. This did not have anything but a 1 as a GCF, so we don't need to put that 1 out front. And so that's my answer. Let's try one more trinomial. So again, we're in the same homework. I'm going to do number 10. Okay, number 10 is 21x squared minus 70x plus 56. Looking for a GCF, hoping for a GCF, because these are big numbers, and I really don't want to do 21 times 56, but sometimes you have to. But let's check if there's a GCF. In this case, the GCF, thank goodness, is 7. So we have 3x squared minus 10x plus 8. Okay, again, you could do the magic square at this point, or the magic x, or you could start your grouping what you want to have. So the 7's kind of out here waiting. So you can just write that at the end if you want, or you could put it on the outside so you don't forget. It's up to you. Okay, so I'm going to write first, my first term first, 3x squared. My last term last, plus 8. My middle term I know has to be split up. When it splits, it's going to have an x on it. It's going to have an x on it. Now, I don't know if they're going to be positive or negative, but I'm going to put a plus there for now. Okay, come over here and do my magic x. A times c is 24. B is negative 10. Watch your negatives here. Okay, and again, I went and I looked, and negative 6 times negative 4 is positive 24. Negative 6 minus 4, so add negative 4 is negative 10, so that works. So there's my magic x numbers, negative 6 and negative 4. Okay, let's look at our groups. So let's look at our first group here. What can be factored out of those two? What's my greatest common factor? In that first group, never take out a negative. That's a hint to you. Never take out a negative, always take your positive. So I'm going to take out a 3 and also an x. So that leaves me with a 2x. Nope, that does not leave me with a 2x because 3 divided by 3 is just x. Let's get this right if we're going to do that. So that's an x. And then I'm going to be left with I'm going to take this plus negative, and I'm going to make it a negative just to subtract. 6x divided by 3x is just going to be 2. There's my chunk. I hope my two chunks match, okay? Out of my next group, I'm going to take out. Now, you never want to have your lead term be negative. So because we have a negative 4 there, I'm going to take out a negative here, okay? When I do that, this is where you got to really think negatives and positives carefully here. I'm going to take out, I almost said 2. 2 would be a common factor, but not the greatest common factor. I'm going to take out the negative 4. Well, let's do this carefully, okay? So we have negative 4x divided by negative 4 leaves us with a positive x. Positive 8 divided by a negative 4 leaves us with a negative 2. See the reason I did that? Now our two chunks match. If I had taken out a positive 4, the negatives would have been wrong. So that's why I like that internal check. If I hadn't taken out that negative, I'm hoping you would have figured out, oh, I got to take out a negative for this to work, because these two chunks have to match if you're doing grouping, okay? Now our two chunks match because I took out that negative. So now I'm left with my chunk of x minus 2 and my leftovers of 3x minus 4. And guess what? We had that 7 out there waiting. So I'm going to put that 7 there. And there's my answer. Okay? Again, some of you may find that more confusing. Go back to the box method or try the trash method. All right, this also works with 4 terms. So let's talk about what that means if we're doing 4 terms. So I'm in the same homework, but I'm going to do number 6 and number 7 because they have 4 terms, okay? 4 terms are actually easier because someone did the magic X for you. So when you have 4 terms, you don't have to do the magic X. So you have 8ax minus 6x minus 12a plus 9. First things first, out of all 4 of them, is there a greatest common factor that we can take out of all 4 of them? Well, at first glance, it looks like 2 is going to work, but then we have the 9 on the end. Then you might think 3 is going to work, but 3 doesn't go into 8. So in this case, our GCF is 1. For all 4 of them, okay? So it's up to you if you want to rewrite it. I'm going to, just so you can see what I'm going to do with grouping. I already have this split up into 4 terms. When we do the magic X, the whole point of the magic X is to get 4 terms. We already have 4 terms. So let's just look at them separately, okay? Our first group, what goes into 8 and 6? 2 does. What else is the same in both of those two? It's a x. So that leaves behind a 4a minus a 3. Questions? Does that make sense? This is where it's hard to do a video because that's where I want to say, hey, what questions do you have? Ugh. Okay, so like I said before, if your lead number on your second group is a negative, you want to take out a negative. Okay, so I'm going to take out a negative, but what number is it? What goes into 12 and into 9? A 3 does. So that leaves us, crossing our fingers, hoping we did it right, 4a, because negative 12 divided by negative 3 leaves us with a positive 4a, and then 9 divided by a negative 3 leaves us with a negative 3. Again, that's why we took out the negative, so we could match our chunks. Our chunks match here. Again, with 4 terms, you just don't have to do the magic X. That's all that's different. Okay, let's write down our chunk. Our chunk is 4a minus 3. What's left over? 2x minus 3. There we go. If we were to FOIL that, we'd get that same answer. We'd get this answer back. Okay? Well, that's cool how the box went sideways. Let's do one more of these. Sorry. I digress. Number 7. Remember, you have to watch only one of these videos. I have to make all of them. Number 7. So I get a little weird. All right, so it's 5x squared minus 5xy plus 10x minus 10y. And I hope you've noticed as I'm writing and as you're thinking, what goes into all of them is a 5. So we can take out a 5 to begin with. So that leaves us with x squared minus xy plus 2x minus 2y. We already have 4 terms. We don't need a magic x. So we're going to look at our first group. What goes into x squared minus xy? What's our greatest common factor? X. And that leaves us with x minus y. Our next group, our lead term is positive, so we're going to take out a positive, 2. Guess what that leaves us with? I think you can guess. X minus y. Awesome. Our 2 chunks match. If our two chunks match, we probably did this right, unless we're just making up numbers to make it work. You want to check after you do it so that you're not just making up numbers, okay? And what's our chunk? X minus y. So that's what we're going to write down as our chunk. What's left over after we take off the x minus y and write it down? What's left over is x plus 2. Oh, don't forget our little 5 that was hanging out up here waiting to come down. Okay? And there we go. And that is the grouping method. If you have questions, you think you like the grouping method, you keep making the same mistake, ask me. If grouping isn't working for you, try one of the other methods. There's lots of good methods. If you find a method that I didn't do a video on, please let me know, and I will figure it out and learn it and do a video on it. So let me know if you have any questions.